third phase of the judgment takes place after the millennium, after the 1,000 years. And you can find a reference to that in Revelation 20, verses 13 through 15. In other words, the judgment is a process. The judgment is not an event, a punctual event. Now, the stage that we especially want to take a look at today as we study this subject of the judgment is that first stage that I mentioned, the stage that occurs before the second coming of Jesus, before the close of probation. Now, in order to understand this particular phase of the judgment, the first one, which is mentioned in Revelation 14, verse 7, we need to go back to the story of creation. And you say, well, why do we need to go back to the story of creation? Very simply because the first angel's message calls us to go back and talk about the Creator. You know that the first angel's message says, worship Him who made the heavens, the earth, the seas, and the fountains of waters. So in other words, the first angel's message itself sends us back to the story of creation in order to understand the judgment. So we have to go back to Genesis and talk about the origin of man. Go with me to Genesis chapter 2 and verse 7. Genesis chapter 2 and verse 7. It's speaking here about the creation of man. And I want you to notice the description. There are several elements that we're going to underline here. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground. Now, it's the physical nature of man that is composed of dust or of clay, as Isaiah 64 verse 8 says, God is the potter and we are the clay. Our physical nature is composed of clay. But even after God made this perfect body originally without sin, the body was without life. I didn't say that it was dead. It was lifeless. Because there was something lacking. You see, only having the body of matter perfect with all of its parts did not mean that the body was alive. And so God had to do something to that body. Notice what it continues saying. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Another way of saying that is He breathed into his nostrils the energizing force, the electrical force, if you please, and man became a living soul, or a living being. Now, there are several things that I want us to notice about this verse. First of all, man was created with a material body, a body composed of matter. And of course, in the head of that body was the brain, the center of operations of the body, if you please. The brain is that organ that processes everything that comes in through our five senses. In other words, our eyesight, our hearing, our touch, our smell, our taste, everything that comes in through the five senses is processed by the brain. And the brain, of course, is a physical organism as well. It's also composed of matter. But I want you to notice that the body with this processor, the brain, did not function until God plugged the body in, so to speak, into the electrical source, which was giving the body and the brain the capacity to function.